So we've got something different here for this video. This is an old brass model that was sent to me by one of my viewers, actually. He was wondering if I could do some repair work on it, see if I could get it running, fix a few details on the body. So from what I can find about it, this appears to be a model made possibly by Akane back in the mid to late 50s. This would be one of their absolute earliest models because there's pretty much no info available on these that I can find. Just a little trace of something here and there. And this would be one of the earliest versions of it too, because the couple other models I did find had some little changes, such as the spokes and the wheels being completely see-through, and then just a few more bits of piping and other things added here and there over the years. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is the first version of it, and probably a rare piece too. But as you can see, it has not exactly been treated kindly over the years, with pieces just kind of hanging over all over the place and other things broken off. So let's see what I can do with it. And the first thing I'm going to do, see if I can get the chassis running. And once that's done, I'll get to working on repairing the body. No screws holding it on right now, but you've got your standard open frame motor, piece of drive tubing connecting it to the gear here, which this does look very similar to the parts that were used in my my cab forward steam engine. I don't think I've shown that one online before. Well, maybe I did, I can't remember. But anyway, this does look a lot like Akane's work, and definitely a very early example of it. So let's get to work on here. Before I try to run anything, I'm going to go ahead and do some disassembly right from the start. Take off the rear truck here, which is sprung. Oh, that was close. That looks like a brass spring. Not much tension there. And let's see, take off the front truck here. And do the motor next. That plate's kind of loose. Looks like there's a screw that holds it in place. Speaking of screws, there's another one that was hanging around. Looks like the motor has one that's holding it on there. Pull it off of the drive tubing, or other way around. And that drive tubing is completely shot, by the way. That's hard as a rock. Pull that off. There it goes. Replace it with something else later on. The motor is at least turning freely, and that's a good sign. The commutator looks pretty clean too, so I don't think I'll have to take this apart. I'll just put a bit of fresh oil into the bearings. Okay. Alright, power this on, see what happens. Considering its condition, I'm sure this motor will take right off, but you never know until you actually get started. These brushes are not grounded, I don't think. So I'll hook up to the springs. That's not bad. It's not a super well balanced motor. I can feel vibration from it, but it's actually a really efficient runner. It's only using about 0.2 amps. Not bad at all. Well, that's it for the motor maintenance then. That was easy. Now the real question is the rest of the running gear here. Let's see, this gearbox looks like it's been formed in a certain way. How is that put together? Oh, I think I see there's a screw at each end. But there's also a set screw on the worm shaft. So I'll take that off first. There we go. The screwdriver is a bit large for here, but it works. Slip that out. Came off easy enough. Got a bit of dirty oil on there. I'll just wipe that clean. Now, the problem that I was told was that the chassis seizes when it's trying to go around, and I can definitely feel that here. There's part of the problem. This eccentric is out of place, but it's still seizing. What is getting in the way? I think I see part of the problem here. This eccentric is bent down, so I'll just carefully bend this up. All right, so that helped on that part. Still not very smooth though. It's real stiff around here, and then it frees up around here. Oh, there's part of the problem. These rods are just kind of flopping all over the place. It actually feels pretty good already. Seems like the biggest problem was just that bent eccentric on there. But hey, that's always good to have a simple problem that can be worked out easily. Well, for now, I'll disconnect the rest of these rods with a smaller screwdriver and just test each thing one at a time until I've got all the binds worked out and everything's working as smoothly as possible. Interesting, so this is a double screw assembly here. So it uses a larger screw for the main rods, but then has drilled and tapped for an even smaller screw. Oh, clever design work there. This holds the valve gear in place. That's some really typical construction for the 40s and 50s. It's just a simple hanger going over the side there. I'll remove the rest of the rods too, just so I can clean up and focus on one axle at a time. These wheels spin pretty well already, but I can definitely feel this one and hear it binding with something. With the valve gear hanger. Right here. So simple fix there at least. Just had to move this a bit out of the way. That screw's really chewed up. I think someone trying to get this as tight as possible to prevent that same bind that I found here ended up destroying the screw in the process. And it's directly hooked up to this other piece here. Okay. Well, as long as I can get one part of this good and tight, I don't think I'll have to worry too much about the rest of it. All it needs is enough clearance to not touch those flanges. That seems pretty good so far. That's a pretty solid frame there. Solid cast brass. Not the formed U-channel sheet metal that they would have used later on. I wonder what that hole is for. Almost looks like there was supposed to be a spring or something in that spot. But I really can't tell. Or maybe it was clearance for a screw head, but at the same time I don't see one on the motor that would match to that location. And there were the screws I was looking at earlier. But no reason to take those out because this gearbox won't actually come off without removing the wheel and gear from the axle. So I'll just clean this up without taking those off. Folded paper towel works pretty well in these kinds of areas. And a stiff brush for the gear. Yeah, that's good enough. Doesn't feel like the parts are worn out or anything. Very little slop there. Turning smoothly. Let's give the rest of these a quick cleaning. These wheel treads are actually pretty clean too. I think a quick, whoa, hello. Huh, okay. So one wheel is actually not very tight on the axle. I'll have to check on the quartering then. Maybe that's part of where some of that binding was coming from. Let's see, with the way this is put together, I can't use the quartering tool. I guess I'll just have to eyeball it for now. Stick that down in there. And I'll use the shape of the chassis as a reference for the quartering. That way just a little. I'll also use the other drive wheels, make sure it's matched up to them. That looks close, at least. Oh yeah, the insulated drivers have just a small bit of insulation between the tire and the actual wheel, or the wheel center. That makes it easy to tell. And fresh oil for all these. This has got to be one of the heaviest frames I've seen in a brass model. So I won't be surprised if this thing lasts forever once it's fixed. Okay, line up all the wheels. Actually, it looks like my eyeballing there with the quartering was almost spot on. That was a lucky shot. Looks like one washer was missing from the model, so I might have to find a replacement for that if it causes problems. I'm sure I've got one on hand that'll work. Do the front rods first, see how those turn. Then add the back ones after that, as long as these are working correctly. All right, how does this turn? Feel the binds there. Oh yeah, looks like I am just slightly off with the quartering. Which way does it need to go? All right, so I've been messing around with that, and I think I've got the quartering as close as I'll be able to get it. So that's turning pretty well. And it rolls nice and smooth too. Of course, I don't want it to lose that quartering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this Sharpie to make a couple markings here. So those are my reference points to make sure I can get it as close and perfect as possible. I don't remember which wheel was the loose one. Forgot to watch that, so I'll mark both sides for now. And Sharpie works well because it's really easy to clean off with some alcohol. So now, when it's off quarter, yeah, that's the one. You can see the lines there and make sure that they are perfectly lined up with each other. So I'm going to squeeze around the axle, make some markings in there. And they're not deep or anything. Just enough to provide a small amount of extra grip. So what I'm going to do is put a drop of super glue onto this wire here. Spread that around inside of the hole. Make sure I've got the orientation correct. And twist that thing back on. Looks like I've got it lined up where it needs to be, but that glue has already made it so tight that I can't push it on anymore, so I'll just put it over into the vise real quick. Bring it back over in a second. All right, so the wheel's back in place now. So I can just get these side rods back on and continue with the repair. All right, so after a little more tweaking here and there, everything seems to be working very smoothly. I feel only a couple of very slight binds here and there. It isn't anything that I was able to work out completely, but this feels like it's turning smoothly enough that it shouldn't cause any problems running. So I attached the rest of the rods, valve gear and everything, made sure they were all lined up and working smoothly. And this seems to be a pretty good roller. So I'll go ahead and use an alcohol-soaked Q-tip to take these Sharpie marks off now. Alright, so now I'll finish that up by adding a bit of oil to all of the moving parts. Of course, I already did the axles, so I'll only be doing the rods here. Okay, that's looking good. So now, add the worm back in. Whoops, don't want to lose that set screw. Shorter than I thought. There, got it in. Drop that in there. slip the shaft back through. Try the other way. That's going easier. Okay. Okay. Now, this motor's going to need a new piece of drive tubing. Here we go. Got some leftovers from an Arbor Models kit. This is actually some pretty good quality tubing and still nice and flexible. Let's see, do I need to change the length at all? I'll cut a little bit off of there. All right, to make sure the motor and everything else is connected right where it needs to be, I'm actually leaving the worm loose for a moment. So then I can tighten the motor onto there. Huh. That's interesting, the motor's sitting on that screw head, holding this back plate on. I sort of wonder if there was originally supposed to be a mount for this motor of some kind. After looking around in my parts, I found this old wheel. I think it came off of a Tyco drive truck. But this seems to be exactly the size that I'm needing here. Let's see if that works. Let's see, close, but not quite. The alignment there is not quite perfect. That's going to put quite a bit of strain on the motor, I think. Don't want to do that. But what I can do is file down the edge of that wheel, give it a bit of an angle. There's not a lot of screw thread coming through there, so I might change that to a different length. Well, I'll definitely change that to a different length, because you want this thing to hold together tightly. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Okay, so now we've got that figured out. I'll just re-tighten that set screw. Oops. It's real easy to slip while you're trying to tighten these. Okay. I'll just hook up the terminals. And there it goes. That's not too bad. Motor's got quite a bit of torque too. That's good. Okay, so now that's worked out. Bit of oil for the worm bearings. And some grease for the gear. Just want this to work itself in slowly. way too. As for that excess that's coming off around the edges, swipe that real quick. You don't want it flinging out to anywhere else that's not supposed to go. This actually feels like it's running pretty smoothly now. I think this will be a nice runner when it's done. And it's only drawn about 0.3 amps. Not bad at all for a brass model of this age. Okay. Now I need to see about rewiring this thing. Alright, so I've got the motor wired. The chassis I have going through a terminal that's connected to that screw there. And then I soldered the wire to this terminal of the motor. And then this one here will go to the tender. And while I was working on this, I realized something very interesting about this model. And that is that it has never once been run before. It's never seen the track for even a moment. And to confirm that, I was looking at all the other wheels. You can't see any sign of ever being on the track at all. This mechanism is brand new. So when this thing starts running, it's going to be the first time in the 60, 65 years since it was manufactured that it's ever once run before. So that'll be very interesting. So to connect it to the tender, I put an extra screw in the bottom there and attached another terminal, so it's basically out of the way. And I used a 256 screw to connect the drawbar there. And to lock that in place, I'll put a nut on top of here later. But for now, this thing is wired. It should be ready to run. All right, first ever track test. I put a weight on here to give it some balance. Let's see what happens. And off it goes. Got a bit of a growl to it, but it's running smoothly. Whoops. My weight slid off there and caused a short circuit. That was doing just fine. Running about a half amp on average. And that's the full speed there, by the way, so it's not exactly a fast runner. That's definitely looking good. Now that it's running smoothly, I'll get to repairing the details on the body as best as I can. There are quite a few areas that have come apart simply due to poor soldering, so it shouldn't be too hard to fix a lot of this. So in order to do that, I'll just clean up some of the areas a bit with this wire wheel here, fine steel one, and then just some regular tin lead solder, and then for the soldering iron, I've got the big tip here, so that'll heat it up nice and quickly in order to take care of this in a short amount of time. So I'll start by resoldering the cab here, which was barely even tacked on in a few areas. There's some tabs inside I can see, so that's a convenient location for soldering. Take off some of the tarnish and oxidation. This will help the solder to flow a lot better. Let's see, that'll work. So I'll just put some fresh solder on the tip. Gently set that in there. Might take a little time for the metal to heat up enough. Once it does, Solder will flow right into the joint. The solder has a flux core, so that also makes it a lot easier to work on. Looks like that flowed all right. So now the other one. The metal on this body is somewhat thin, so that makes it a bit easier to solder because it doesn't take too long to heat up. Those look like some good strong joints now. Now, what else needs to be soldered? I think this part should be next. Of course, the first thing I need to do is straighten that out. So I'm using the smooth inside part of these pliers. That works pretty well for reforming stuff like this. And then I'll also bend some of it by hand, just to get it into where it needs to be. It looks like there's a lot of stress on this joint, and that combined with poor soldering caused it to come apart at some point. So for this, I'm putting a little solder on each side here. So that way I can hold the part together with pliers and then reflow it. And that should make for a good strong joint. Just have to find a good way to grip it. That's holding on nice and strong. Don't want it to break later on though, so I'll also make sure the rest of that has plenty of solder. Okay, just file off some of the excess solder. Interesting. So it looks like the boiler is made up of sections that are covered up by the jacket strips around here. You can see just some of it twisting in there, like that spot there. So I'll definitely want to resolder that too. That's going to be tricky since there's some solder left over inside. I think I can do some reflowing here in addition to the fresh stuff. Well, the shape of the area just doesn't allow me to get the tip in there the way that I really need. But maybe I can get a little to flow underneath here. This might not look quite as good as soldering from the inside, but at the same time you don't want it falling apart again. Did that help at all? There we go. That's not twisting anymore. Just gently file off that excess. All right, I think that's about as good as I'm going to get it. A little bit showing on the bottom, but unless you're looking directly at that area in this angle, it won't even be visible. The rest of the structure appears to be fine, so now I think it's just down to the details, like this walkway here. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even notice. These can slide back and forth. Nice little touch. Just figuring out the best way to work on this. There's a lot of solder on there. I think I can reflow it. I'll give that a try first. Okay, that didn't hold. Try that again. There, that time it's staying in place. There's one more in here. Can't quite reach it though. The air tank won't let me get to it. Yeah, maybe I'll just try and remove this tank for now. Then I can get in there and put it back on when I'm finished. Okay, taking the tank off of there helped a lot in getting that walkway back in place, so all 4 of those joints are now soldered, so that at least won't break free as long as it's handled not too roughly. So now there's just a few straps around here that need some soldering. I already did a little cleaning around there with the wire wheel. And for these I definitely don't want to use much solder because anything that is on there is going to show up. So let's see if I can do this carefully. Put a little here. Hold that down. Reflow that. Looks good. So now the other one. Okay, I think that's going to stay on there. Chips that off. It was being a bit stubborn, but I finally got that part reattached. Doesn't look perfect, but that shouldn't show up too bad under some paint if this ever gets painted. So after fixing that, I just kind of straightened up the handrails a bit. I looked for any kinks in there and just gently straightened them as well as I could with pliers. That seems to have turned out well. I also put the weight back inside of it because the next part that's going to go on is the smoke box front. And once that's on there, the weight's going to be in there forever. So I already did a little preparation on the back of here, just refresh the solder a little. I'll do the same up here. This is going to be one of the most visible areas of the whole engine, so I want to make sure to get this solder as clean as possible. And that may also be why a minimal amount was used at the factory. That should help it out. Yeah, that's flowing better now. So once I put the smoke box front on there, it should actually stick. Okay. Now comes the tricky part of the whole thing. This goes on here. There's got to be something I can do to hold that in place while I solder it. Okay, so I'm holding that on there with a piece of masking tape, and I've got that centered and right where it needs to be. Let's see if I can reflow the solder. Make that hold. I think that got it. Well, it's not falling off anyway. That's a good sign. So now, do the same for the top, but this time I want to kind of hold it down. I think that got it. Let's see if that worked. Close, but not quite. Okay, hold it down again. Okay, that feels better this time around. So now just a bit more up here to make sure that it is actually holding as strong as I'm hoping. Okay. Yeah, that looks good now. The way is that going to come off? Just take off a bit of the excess real gently. Okay, I think that about does it for the boiler. Still got the cowcatcher pilot for the chassis. It looks like there was something else that's supposed to go on each side, but it looks like that's missing from the parts. I'm guessing it's just a couple of steps, so something like that should be easy enough to replace later. So I'll just go ahead and reattach that cowcatcher. I think that'll be enough for the chassis. There's also a ladder right here. I've looked around, I can't seem to find where this is supposed to go. I thought maybe it goes somewhere on the tender, but I just can't find a location for it. Oh well. And I can't find anywhere that it goes on here either. Unless maybe it's supposed to go somewhere on the boiler. Well, I'll see if I can find a few more pictures to be sure. For now though, let's just get this pilot reattached. And it looks like it's just another case of bad soldering. That looks like it's well attached now. Won't be going anywhere anytime soon. I think I actually did find one of the steps that goes on the front. There's also a hole there, so I don't know if something was supposed to go in there or not. Maybe a pin of some kind. Well, most of the parts I soldered, but since this one's small, I think it'll survive with super glue instead. Okay. Well, looking through the parts, I think the last piece is this ladder here, so I'm going to try and look that up, see if I can find that. Well, there's also this bent up piece of metal here, but I have no idea where this would be going. Unless it looks like something else when I flatten it, which it really doesn't. This might just be a piece of scrap. It's hard to say. Well, I've looked everywhere on the model and at every photo I can find of any others of these that have appeared, and I just cannot find a location for this ladder piece. So it could be that it came from another engine. So I'll just leave that off. Of course, I'll keep it with it. So if it turns out it is supposed to go somewhere, it can be attached. So the only thing left I'm really missing is the screw to hold the boiler on, but I've already got that on the way. And I did at least have two others to fit in the back, so I can get this mostly assembled for now. Let's put the body over the motor. It's a tight fit that just makes it down. There are two screws that go in the back. The handrails go into these holes here. Of course, they're bent slightly out of shape. I think there are also some marker lights that were supposed to go in these holes, but those are missing, but easy enough to replace. There, they don't go inside far, but that's enough to keep them where they're supposed to be. That's where the screw will go when I have it. This screw on the front truck is slightly too tight. I should be able to swivel. Touch of glue to keep it from backing out. I believe this is the screw that was holding it in place. Just a small one. Now the spring here. I'll stretch that to the truck. That is staying up a bit too high though. Since that's just a brass strip, I can bend that to where it's needed. The sides of the truck are held together by screws, so it's possible for it to twist out of shape slightly. Actually, that might be so that it can do some self-equalizing. So those must have been, or at least one of them must have been over-tightened. Those do need some fresh oil. Almost forgot about that. Yeah, looks like those are rolling and self-equalizing now, just the way they're supposed to be. So now the last one on here is the rear truck. This spring got compressed. I'm pretty sure this is made of brass, so it may not have much spring tension. Okay, that's got spring tension. So now I'll just do a little work on the tender. And this should be ready to run. I've also been asked to put a KD coupler on here. So we'll get rid of that old hook and loop thing. See what I can do here. I think someone tried to solder this coupler in place. So since this here is the main contact area, I'm going to clean that up with the wire wheel a bit. And the same on the truck. I also put a bit of oil in here, so that really helped a lot with the rolling of these things. So now before I reattach that, I don't want these screws backing out while it's running, so touch of super glue inside of the hole. And put the truck back on. I tightened it down, then backed it off about 1/8 of a turn, maybe a 1/4 turn would do best here. Yeah, that's given enough room for the truck to swivel around a bit. And it can still also equalize. But the super glue prevents the screw from backing out. It's now the same for the other truck. All right, I've got a KD number 58 coupler mounted on there. The metal coupler can touch the metal sides a bit, so best to use an insulated freight passenger card coupled to that. And while I was working on it, I noticed that the body was actually assembled backwards onto the chassis, so I flipped that around, and that is now correct. So now I can reconnect this to the engine. Screw down there. And put that in. Not all the way. Actually, this will be easier if I put the drawbar on the tender first and then attach it to the engine. There, now I can get to it. That nut will go right here. Yeah, that's working better. Now with the screw in place, I'll just crank this down a bit, and that will keep the screw from backing out. Now that's in tight. Valve gear rods like to drop out of there. That's one thing to keep an eye on. That's tightened, so now I can put this screw back in place. Looks like that screw can actually back itself out. So I'd better add a bit of glue to that hole too. Don't want things falling apart. Well, aside from getting that last screw, I think that's about all I can do with this. So now that that's back together, I'm just going to give this more track testing to make sure there are no more problems. It's got a little wobble to it, just because of the old wheels. Not perfectly rounded. So I'd say that's running really well overall. Did discover a short circuit when running in reverse. I think it's related to either the front or rear truck, so I'll check on those, fix that. But that's looking pretty good on there. Alright, I found where the short circuit was coming from. This original spring for the rear truck was too large, and it was actually touching the insulated wheel here while it was running in reverse. So I replaced that with a smaller spring, which doesn't put a lot of tension on there, but it's just enough to hold it down as much as it needs because the truck is also heavy on its own. After some further observation, I found the real problem, I think, behind that wobble running around was that all of the drive wheels are actually way off quarter. So you can see there, I've got the pins in here. There's the Northwest Shortline quartering tool, and I can actually move this back and forth within the tool. It shouldn't be able to move at all when it's perfectly quartered. So to correct that, I can't just twist these wheels. The only one that was loose was that middle drive wheel, so I'll have to redo that one again. But anyway, what I'm doing is first I am pulling just one wheel. So now I can freely turn that. Put the pin back in here. Drop this into the quartering tool. And these two screws, they hold the axle firmly in place to make sure that it doesn't drift or wander while you're trying to line things up. All right, align the tight wheel there. And loose wheel just the same way. So now the pins are touching the sides there. Press that on just a bit. Now, loosen these screws. These screws are made of nylon so that they don't damage the axle. Remove the pins. Being careful not to ruin the quartering. And then I'll press it back onto the axle with my vise. And here it is in the vise. Just real gently squeeze that. Looking back, it would have been a bit safer to maybe have some paper towels on both sides of the vise to prevent possible scratches, but it looks like it came out just fine, so I don't think there'll be any problems here. Right, so the wheels are now quartered as well as I can get them, and that seems to be working well. It still hasn't gotten rid of the wobble completely, but it has made the operation a little smoother. So I've run it in both directions a bit, both on the straight track and around curves, to see how it does, and it seems to be working really well now. So I've got that hooked up to some passenger cars, so I can just have this running around for a little while, make sure everything holds up the way it needs, and then beyond that, I think the only other thing it will need is that last screw to hold the boiler on, and this will be ready to go back. It's not a quiet engine, but it does seem to be a nice runner. Alright, so I finally got the new screw, so I'll just put that into the front there. Drop that in. Tighten it down. And that is it. The model is finished, ready to run. And now it's time to pack it up and send it on back. So, to the original owner of this model, I hope this gives you a lifetime of excellent service.